Hello, hello. If you are seeing this video, then there's a good chance that you've made it all the way through part 5 of my video series outlining a commercial romance, parts 1 through 5. I apologize for the poor editing. I'm a professional writer by trade, not a video editor by trade, although I feel like I did get a little bit better there at the end by part 5. I got a lot of practice snipping and speeding up and all those other things. So I hope that future video series will be better edited. You have my sincerest promise to try and sort of master that aspect of this particular craft. Below this video, you should see a few links by the time this is up to several books that were of inspiration for me. They're great books to learn about the substance and structure of storytelling. I can't recommend any of these books highly enough. If I listed it, it's because it's a very, very good book that can really make a huge difference in how you think about story structure. So there's something that I'm really fond of saying on the forums, on Dirty Discourse, which is where a lot of this stuff got started, which is a quote from Bruce Lee to practice the form but seek the formless. And so they've all heard that. If you're coming to this video from outside of Dirty Discourse, if you've only just recently started seeing the YouTube videos through where they were maybe published on Facebook or something like that, then it's important to know that this whole process is a way of jump-starting the ability to develop a storytelling instinct. The goal is not to produce consistently formulaic fiction, although, depending on what genre you're in, it may be that formulaic fiction is actually sort of king for that genre. And if that's the case, like, you should absolutely stick to some sort of a formula because that's what readers want. But this same system, you know, I've applied it in this case to a romance, but it will apply just as well to a thriller, it'll apply to fantasy, it'll apply to science fiction. The essence of this system, and hopefully this came across in the videos, is that it's a character-centric system, right? One of the things that has been talked about a lot in really great books on writing fiction is that no matter what story you're telling, no matter how fantastic it is, no matter how out there or wild, as long as you have characters which the reader can connect to and that they can follow some sort of a character arc, they can see the character responding both to everything that's going on inside and also everything that's happening in the story in general to the plot, then what you will end up with is really vivid characters that can bring a reader into that world to really experience it. So that's part of the reason that once I had started messed with the system a little bit, I looked at it from a plot first point of view, from a theme first point of view, how to construct a story around a message, how to construct a story from a concept, and so on and so forth. What I found was that when I started with when I made it character-centric first, then the story that got built up around it, you can tweak a story indefinitely, but as long as you nail the character development and create vivid characters that go through realistic transformations, who act logically, who long for things, who desire things, who are challenged, and who respond to those challenges, and they sometimes fail and they sometimes pass by the end, then what I think you will get is a piece of fiction that, regardless of what the actual plot is, it will draw the reader in. And that's really the most important thing. There are lots of books out there who don't have which don't have the most interesting storylines and don't have the most unique plots. I mean, you can look at a lot of work that is fiction but is considered contemporary fiction, right? It's not fantasy or science fiction or thriller or anything like that, or historical fiction sometimes. The stories themselves can be a little bit sort of boring, right, depending on what you like, but where that contemporary fiction really shines is in having really vivid characters who go through really vivid transformations, and that the readers can connect to on a really deep level. And you can so that kind of fiction is almost always character first, right? Like romance is a genre, or contemporary romance is a genre that is very character first. So not all fiction is character first, and so part of the reason that I approached the system the way that I did was because I was in the habit of thinking of stories, fantasy in particular is my chosen genre. That's the place where I really would like to spend most of my time writing. I write romance, I ghostwrite, I plot doctor, those sorts of things. That's what I do as sort of a job, to make money, to have an income so that I can write full time. But fantasy and science fiction and possibly thriller, possibly horror, those sort of fantastic sort of genres, those are the places where I really want to spend my time writing. So for me, that process of thinking about what's the next good story is thinking about them in terms of grand sort of Game of Thrones plot lines. What if there was a succession war? What if there was an invasion of aliens to a fantasy world? What if there were dragons that covered the sky? They were so huge. Those sorts of things. I think about those sort of fantastic elements, and that wasn't that's the way that a lot of people think about things like fantasy storylines. For instance, they think about a fantastic situation, and then come up with characters to sort of explore that situation, if they're thinking about that, which a lot of the time these days they sometimes aren't. But if instead you look at what kind of character you want to explore, think about a character like Scrooge from The Christmas Carol, or A Christmas Carol. Scrooge has a really specific arc that's very unsubtle. It's very dramatic. He goes from two extremes, from greed to charity. That is a character exploration of how a person goes from greed to charity. The story itself is the frame in which he goes through that transformation. It's just it's the backdrop to it. Not that it's not a delightful story in terms of every aspect of it. I mean, A Christmas Carol is world famous and has been for ages for a good reason. It's a really good story. But the part of the reason it's so good is because it does an excellent job of digging down into a character and showing how they can change from one thing to the other. So you can take the same principle, that character first principle, and you can apply it to any type of story. It does really well in romance because that's what we really want to see in a romance, is see a very specific character sort of transformation. Romance is an excellent genre to sort of cut your teeth on as a writer because it's something that's sort of deeply embedded in the human spirit, this idea of falling in love, that sort of thing. So it's something that connects to a lot of people naturally. It's a genre where you don't have to have a incredibly developed writing style, right? You can write at about 4th to 6th grade level and do just fine writing romance. Whereas with fantasy and science fiction, all of the greats, they write at a somewhat more advanced level of prose. Not that advanced, it's still up to, I think, about an 8th grade level is your average reader. And then past that, you start getting into poetic prose and literary fiction. But so if you are watching this as a new writer or someone who's just interested in writing, then this system is a great way to get into a system of developing fiction. Just specifically using romance is a great place to start, to explore a character, to be aware of story structure, and to start developing those storytelling instincts. For the people that are watching this that have been publishing for a long time, who've already sort of developed a storytelling instinct, I think that a lot of the reason that there was so much interest in this system and that there was so much appreciation for the simplicity of this system and the directness of the way that everything was sort of handled, I think that a lot of that comes from the same reason that when I started working on putting that step-by-step process together, for me what it did was take a lot of things that I already knew and have known for years and put them into a context of a sort of order of operations that sort of takes some of the stress and initial thinking process out of it. Now, not that you shouldn't be thinking about your story or your characters or that you shouldn't be thoughtful, but a lot of the watchers who have been writing for a long time know that there is a part of the writing process that can be really, really difficult to sort of power through, and it's the part of just throwing the story together. It's a lot like making a sculpture with clay. You slap a whole bunch of clay on there, in roughly the shape that you want to see, and then you start carving away the unnecessary bits and that sort of thing. So for me, that's what this system does. It's the slapping of the clay together. If the system is followed fairly closely, right, step by step, if we start out by finding what length we want to write to, and then figure out where our major story points are, that sort of thing, then what you get is a story that's already really well balanced to begin with. It's got all the major plot points. It's got well-balanced character development between two characters, or potentially more characters if you're running at a longer length and you can fit and want to fit more than two characters into a story. It gives us a really excellent sense of pacing for all of our scenes, so that we know that every scene hits 5 specific points at least. They may hit other points depending on your what sort of a story you're writing. There may be more world building that's necessary, right? And in those types of more fantastical genres and subgenres of romance, like paranormal romance, for instance, you can get away with a lot longer scenes because you sometimes have to look at fantastical cultures, fantastical situations, fantastical worlds, and sort of bring the reader into that. And it's readers of those genres, that's what they really like. They like to be brought in and immersed. So you can do that while exploring a character, and exploring a character through this system of character arc. So this is the series of videos that has to do specifically with applying this system to romance. There will be other videos. I'm about to start outlining a fantasy novel. In future videos, like the romance videos, are going to more or less serve as the introduction to the system. The only thing that I'm really going to cover with those other books is I'm going to sort of talk about the principles of those particular genres. So in this series, early on, I talked about, what are the goals for a romance, what sorts of things to keep in mind when you're first developing the story, why they should get together, why they shouldn't get together, things like that. Those are specific considerations to a romance. Versus a thriller, there's a consideration of like how graphic do you want it to get? How heinous do you want the crime to be? Is it going to be more of on the mystery end of the thriller spectrum, or is it going to be more on the action and sort of chasing end of the spectrum, that sort of thing? I've been reading a lot of thrillers lately, sort of digging up what the specific differences in how scenes are constructed is, things like that. So all of that, once that sort of research is done, that's going to culminate in a thriller series. Horror is something that I'm a little, it's difficult to write really good horror at length, but I think that it can be done. I haven't read as much horror, so I'm going to spend some time reading horrors as well in order to kind of suss out what are some of the principles there. And there are a great many books on these things, and I encourage you to go out and find those books and read books about how to write a thriller, how to write a horror, that sort of thing. The point of my system, the point of this series, is to take what you'll learn in those other books, those books that you'll find that are about story structure, story points, that sort of thing, by James Scott Bell and Larry Brooks. Those are both of those authors have written a great many books on story structure. They're excellent books. I can't recommend enough going out and finding those books and reading them, and then even coming back and going through this system again to really see how it is that all of this stuff sort of comes together, and also to see how, when you take a look at those books, they can be a little bit arcane. Taking that information out of the book and actually applying it in a way that instantly sort of makes sense, that's sort of what I aimed to do with this series. So I think that you'll find that if you go and you explore those concepts, the various plot points and that sort of thing, I think that what you will find is that this system makes use of all of that information in a really succinct and a really direct way. Now, in the end, after you've had practice putting together stories and things like that, it may be that you can improve on this system for your own process, and that's fine. It may be that this process doesn't really do it for you, but maybe it helps you just explore how to construct a story from beginning to end. Maybe it's just a way of exploring story structure without actually using it to outline a book for you. If that's the case, any of those things, that's fine. There is no one way to outline a novel, even on YouTube, much less the books that you can find on Amazon. There are a million ways to construct a story. This way, the strength of it is just that everything is accounted for. You never have to wonder what part you do next. There's an order of operations, and that is an excellent way to train yourself to tell good stories, right? So this whole system, these are training wheels, and after you master this particular system, after you've outlined lots of books and you've taken those outlines and turned them into novels and that sort of thing, you will almost invariably realize that you're developing an instinct for story. For me, this process has been great because I can really rapidly develop an outline, and I have to write a lot of books and I have to write them fast, and sometimes I get ideas from clients with outlines that need a lot of work, so it's a great way for me to take the core elements, go back with this system, stretch everything out, make sure that I'm hitting all the right points at the right times, and then what I come back to them with is a much better, much more balanced story that still has all of the elements that they originally wanted in that story. So that's how I doctor outlines. It's how I develop outlines really fast. It's how I go from having just an inkling of an idea, what is it that I want to write a book about next, and actually go through an exploratory process that produces an outline, instead of what I used to do, which was collect lots and lots and lots of notebooks, you know, and develop, you know, a story from pages and pages and pages of notes and ideas and brainstorming and things like that. There's still a place for brainstorming, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, I can spend 6 hours writing backstory and world building and character stuff and relationships and whatnot, or I can explore those same things in a very direct, sort of goal-oriented way and end up with an outline that I can then, if I want to, either start writing a book right away, or I have the whole structure in place, I have the whole story in place, all I have to do is go back and start, you know, polishing the outline itself and getting the story up to a point where I know that when I produce a novel from it, it's going to be a good book. So I'm really pleased with all of you who have come and watched this series. I know it was a little bit of a slog. I'm not the best public speaker. I tend to ramble a little bit and wander on, and it's because I'm a writer and not a public speaker or a presentator or anything like that. This you can see some of the corner of the ceiling and stuff. This is the cave that I effectively live in and spend my life in. It's very spare. I don't see a lot of people, and so it was a pleasure speaking to all of you. It was a pleasure walking you through the system. I hope that you learned something. I hope that I gave you some tools, even if you don't take the whole system. I hope that some part of it helps you become a better writer. The whole reason that I made this series, you know, is because I'm developing this system mostly for myself to make things easier for me and to come up with a way to explore stories more quickly and develop an outline more quickly. But also, I want to see the whole writing community become overall sort of better. And it's not that I think that it's bad. I think that we just, as a community, indie authors especially, you know, we don't usually have a whole series of editors out there whose job it is to take one book that we write, hand it out to 5 or 6 people, and have all of those professionals go through the book, find what needs fixing, tell us that the character arc isn't balanced enough, tell us that we've forgotten about the stakes halfway through, things like that. We don't have that sort of backup team most of the time, not until you start making enough money that you can pay the good editors a lot of money to do that sort of thing for you, because it's a time-intensive process. So the more tools that we have in our collective toolbox, the more that we share our techniques, the more that we are able to all together explore story structure, writing style, what works and what doesn't work, how to rapidly develop fiction, how to spend more time working on a story rather than trying to brainstorm a story, things like that. I think that the quality of indie fiction altogether gradually becomes elevated. It's sort of a bell curve. There's not all of the 400 and some odd thousand authors currently self-publishing to Amazon are going to come and watch this series, or are ever even going to read a book on story structure necessarily. But nonetheless, those of us who focus on the craft and really focus on mastering the craft, I think it's incumbent upon us to make the craft of writing something that's important to indie authors, and something that's accessible, and something that we talk about and explore and discuss. So that in the end, indie fiction is all around just, on average, better. I mentioned it at the very beginning of the series. I'll mention it again here. There's a link, should be roughly in this area here, whenever I kind of finish up, for dirtydiscourse.com. If you're coming to this series just from the general population of the internets, and you aren't familiar with Dirty Discourse, I, again, cannot recommend enough going and joining that community if you're interested in self-publishing, or even if you're interested in traditional publishing and just want to have a community of writers behind you, helping you, understand how to write in different genres. Dirty Discourse is primarily about romance and erotica, but we've got writers of every genre there, and you'd be surprised how many writers of other genres also write romance, because romance pays really well. So it's entirely worth it to come hang out with us and come meet other authors. And we've got a network of service professionals, editors and cover artists, beta readers and proofreaders, and people who can help improve and doctor your plot, people who will, for instance, ghostwrite your book. I won't, because I stay booked solid and I have my core clients. But there are people there who do those sorts of things. It's a great community, and it's a place where you can feel very supported. I have, since I started there. So again, my highest recommendation, if you're going to make one move in your self-publishing indie author career, the best move that you could make would be to sign up for Dirty Discourse right now. And that's pretty much it for this series. If you liked these videos, if you can stand to hear me talk, then by all means subscribe. Check out the website, theplotwizard.com. There should be a link roughly here when I'm done. Yeah, check out the website. It's where I sell outlines, so if you are just looking to write a book and you're not sure you're ready to jump into outlining your own book so far, the outlines that I write there, that I put up for sale, they're always targeted for what's popular right now in the romance field. There won't be any fiction or suspense type stuff, or there won't be any thriller or suspense type stuff for a little while. I'm going to focus on romance outlines at first, because that's most of the authors that I know. But eventually there will be other outlines there. And if you are trying to focus on just developing a writing style, then it's not a bad place to start. But also, there are blog posts there where I talk about storycraft in general in a little bit more depth, in an essay style, that sort of thing. There's a lot of information there. And of course, you can always find me on Dirty Discourse. You can ask questions in the comments below. Eventually, I'll get back to them. I try and spend a couple of hours each morning kind of dealing with my internet and online stuff. So thanks for being here. Thanks for watching the series. And I hope that you'll all come back for the next one.